Welcome to Agronomic Alchemy with AgroTech USA. I'm James Patterson, joined alongside Molly Alexander and Rob Dedman. Today's topic might be a little bit of a debate. We're going to talk about soil test phosphorus levels, how to make soil test recommendations based upon your phosphorus in your soil test. Now, I want to start this out. You know, everything we do today is based upon today's knowledge, correct? So everything we do, every decision you make is based upon knowledge that we know today. So the first challenge I want to make to both of you, and Molly, I'm going to ask you first. If today's genetics, let's take a corn crop in the United States today, and let's go back in time to the early 80s when the Mehlich soil test was developed. The Mehlich soil test was developed as an acid extraction to replicate what a plant could release from its roots. Tell me today why you think a Mehlich is a good estimation on what a plant can pull out of the soil today. Today's genetics are surely much more advanced in terms of root system, in terms of yield potential towards the genetics that we started with. How can we accurately provide recommendations based on antiquated soil technology?
So it seems antiquated, but there's different ways. And so the way that I like to look at it is, you have your Mehlich test, and then you have your Bray, and you have your Bray values, which is 1 and 2 and things like that. And the way I've always been able to simplify it and break it down is there is a water-soluble test that shows how much phosphorus is available. And then there's also the acid test, or what they call the citrate test. To me, the best estimation of how much phosphorus is truly available, and they'll tell you this, which is called available P, is it has to be the percentage that is available through the water extraction plus the percentage that's available through the citric extraction. Those two values together is what's considered available P. Now, that is just what comes out from the lab itself. The lab is a completely different environmental situation than what we're finding in your true in-field test. Because maybe when you pulled the samples, the temperature is not going to be the same from when you pulled the soil samples to when they tested it and got you the results back. pH is affected by this in quite a few different instances. So what you get from the lab and the values that you get and which test was used, it all has to be able to be tied back into your actual environmental situation that is conducive to your farm. So yes, Mehlich seems like it's antiquated, but it has its place because you can read these different values with these different tests and be able to put them all together to show what is your actual true available phosphorus. The only other problem that comes with this, and the one thing that I tell everyone to look at when they get a soil test, is base saturation values. That's your cation, the amount of cations that is in your soil as a whole as that sample. Those cations, are they not considered antagonists in the soil? Those are the things that will actually tie up your phosphorus values. So if you have a very high calcium percentage on your base saturation, and you look at your phosphorus values, and your phosphorus values are high as well, that to me tells me there's a correlation between the two, and you have some tied up phosphorus in there as well that's not going to be available.
So you mentioned cations. So Rob, explain to us here. So we're talking about cations. Yeah, we're talking about phosphorus, and Molly made a good point about base saturation and having a high amount of calcium and adjusting it to your soil test. Why would I care whether I have a lot of calcium in my soil? How does it affect my phosphorus?
Well, let's go back. Let's talk about what we've talked about previously. Is where did phosphorus come from? It came from apatite, calcium phosphate. Number one, we know that opposites like to attract. So our cations, they naturally want to bond with our anions. That's your positives and your negatives in the soil. So what happens? As soon as you put this mined, refined phosphorus fertilizer back in the soil, immediately what does it want to do? It wants to go back to its original state of calcium phosphate. So when we got high amounts of calcium in our soil, this fixation occurs, rather rapidly because the phosphorus is not having to look for calcium to bond back to. It's there, it's ready to make the bond, and therefore we go right back into the calcium phosphate form.
So then answer me this. So we're talking about looking at a soil test, and we're talking about applying phosphorus, and we talk about a lab test that gives us an amount of available phosphorus. Why would timing or placement matter, Molly, in terms of this? If we knew about where phosphorus was available, but if I was applying my phosphate in the fall, or if I was banding it, or if I was putting it in furrow, why do the different placement and timing methods matter when it comes to making recommendations off a soil test?
Well, it goes right back to what Rob said, and that's because it's so likely to have a fixation issue, and phosphorus is also leachable. And so if we don't, like, think about it in the fall. If we don't have an active living root system in the fall that is extracting nutrients from the soil solution, and we have applied our fall fertility, we are now leaving that fall applied fertility input susceptible to leaching, tie up, and different environmental factors. So by the time we apply our fall phosphorus, whether it was broadcasted over the top, incorporated, at what point in the spring when we actually put a living, growing seedling and plant in that band or however else we applied it, at what point are we able to measure how much of that phosphorus is still there? I mean, there's no way to do it unless we pull test again. And by the time we pull that test again, like I mentioned before, how much has changed by the time we get that and our results back? And so when we go into spring applied, where we either band it or, you know, we run like an in-furrow or a 2x2 or we're running it on the wall or such like that, we're getting a lot closer to that root, you know, the seed where it's going to put out the root and the germination, and it's going to be a lot more available there, and it'll have a quicker response for uptake versus trying to broadcast it and things and hoping that it's not going to be tied up or it's not going to be lost through leaching or environmental processes. So placement, timing, just like Rob said before with temperature and stuff, you know, you have microbial activity when the soil gets over 50 degrees. So the microbes wake up, they start breaking down your phosphorus inputs, get into available forms. And if we're applying it in the fall, our microbes are more than likely dormant because it's too cold. So we have no activity there for it to be broken down, be utilized, things like that. There's just so many factors that fall into the timing, the placement, and even the form as to which the best way to go about putting phosphorus inputs in.
So, Rob, you made recommendations to a number of acres over your career, and you've talked about phosphorus. When you were pulling a nutrient plan together, so a fertility plan together, how were you? I'll give you an example. So you're in Arkansas right now. So you deal with a lot of rice acres. You have high magnesium soil. You have soils that are high calcium. You have lower CEC soils, higher CEC soils. So if you're making a recommendation on a rice grower, and we know the importance of phosphorus on rice, and you had a high mag soil, and you received a soil test recommendation back, did you ever alter your recommendation based upon the soil sample that you received?
Oh, absolutely. You know, I think that's one of the things that I want to point out is, you know, we talked about here earlier, we were talking about timing of sampling and things like that when we're looking at these soil sampling or these soil samples. The time of year that we take the soil sample is going to be a direct effect on the available phosphorus that we're going to see in that Malic 3, especially in that Malic 3 extraction. You know, let's just take a sample that's taken on a cornfield or a rice field in the fall, you know, post harvest, and we're in a low moisture environment typically at that time, so you don't have a lot of moisture in the soil. And where is soil pH at in the fall? You know, you're coming off of a crop where a soil is, you know, lack of better words, it's tired. It's been used and abused throughout the whole cropping season. It's ready for a short break before it starts its next crop. So, you know, we're going to see our lowest pHs of the year at harvest. That's going to affect our phosphorus reading on our soil sample. We come back in the spring, we plant our crop, we apply our phosphorus. You go look at that pH at that time, that pH is going to be higher. So we've got to make those adjustments as we go. You know, we've got to look at fixation or tie up, you know, between magnesium, calcium aluminum, the anions and stuff like that that are or the cations that are gonna affect phosphorus fixation. And we've got to take that into effect that, okay, how much are we going to have to apply in order to get this little bit that we need, to know that we're going to get this little bit we need in the plant?
Okay, so you spoke about a number of challenges around soil testing. So let's boil this down to a very simple conversation. If someone's listening to this now and they said, you've given me a number of reasons why there's a lot of variability in soil sampling, a lot of variability in making applications. Rob, give me your one key point. If someone's going to pull a soil test, what time of year should they pull it to get an accurate representation of what amount of phosphorus they should apply?
There's not going, in my opinion, there's not going to be that key time. My point is to a farmer or a producer or anybody that's pulling that soil test, pull those soil tests at the same time every year. And that way you can create yourself a guide to go by. Learn to work with your phosphorus, your other cation nutrients by using the soil test. Use those as guides.
Okay, now Molly, your key point, you brought it up at the beginning and you spoke about a number of things in terms of looking at your soil test, in terms of what's water soluble and what's coming from your soil test. So if you're making a recommendation from a grower tomorrow, what are the two things that you're asking them to look for in their soil test to provide a baseline of where they need to start?
Just in general?
Yeah.
Okay. In general, it's going to be the base saturation because that's what's considered the balance of the soil. So if we have a balance of cations, so we have our calcium, our magnesium, we have potassium, sodium, hydrogen, and so we want to look at those things, and they have to fall into certain values. If any one of those values is skewed or higher than the other, then we know just based off of that, point blank, our soil is out of balance. When that soil is out of balance, that's when things either start to tie up or they rob things from each other, or we get our soil composition changes drastically. So if you've ever seen, high mag soils, you look like you're walking across something that's dusted with concrete dust. It's very hard, very tight. Well, if we have tight soils and things like that, are we really going to have any percolation with water? So no percolation, no water, no nutrient movement. And so when I'm looking at the soil test, I start at base saturation. We go through those values. We see what our balance is. Once we get past those values, my next most important thing that I look at is phosphorus. Following phosphorus, it then moves into nitrogen is my next factor after phosphorus, which may be surprising to some people. And then following that, I move into sulfur. So it's base saturation, phosphorus, nitrogen, sulfur. Once I have those things in a good, balanced, even plan and fertility plan, then we can move into our micros and things because we know that those play into those heavier micro elements and such.
Great points, and all good points on today's episode of Agronomic Alchemy. Drop any comments or questions in the video, and we'll be happy to answer the questions. We'll continue to explore facts on phosphorus.